Let's create our first component. Edge components are a way of achieving reusability in our views while maintaining isolated states, and in a way reduce the amount of code we write. To an extent, they are similar to components from front-end frameworks like Vue. Note the phrase "to an extent" as Edge components are not reactive. Let's imagine we have a modal in our application, an alert modal for example, and we want to use it multiple places across our views. That would simply mean we would have to copy and paste it wherever we want it, then modify accordingly. To avoid this, we can create a modal component that is reusable and configurable, that we can even use for things other than alerts while keeping the base markup intact. Let's see how we can do that. Edge components are basically Edge template files. So we create components the same way we create other Vue files. Let's create a new component directory where all our components will live. Though we can name this anything, but component describes exactly what it's for. Also, we will see another reason later in this lesson why we are making use of components. Then inside it, we'll create a new file called Modal.edge. We won't be focusing more on styling and markup, so I'm going to paste in the markup for the modal. As you can see, we are making use of Tailwind CSS. We have a button to open the modal. Then this is the modal container. Then we have a background overlay that will be shown or hidden depending on whether the modal is open or closed. Then we have this div here to have the modal centered in the browser. Then we have the actual modal panel, which contains an heading, then some text, then two buttons, one to perform the intended action, then another to cancel or close the modal. Of course, we can't really use it as it is, so let's sprinkle some Alpine.js to it. First, we'll start by creating a component, x data, and the component will contain just one data, which we will call opened, which we will set to false by default. On click of this button, we will open the modal. So let's add a click event to the button. Using Alpine, we can do that with @click. Then the action we want performed, we go inside the quotes, and what we want to do is simply set opened to true. Then to show the modal, we'll make use of the x show directive. So x show equals opened. What x show will do is display this whole div if the value of opened is true, and if it is false, the div will not be shown. We want to also show or hide the background overlay, so we're going to add x show here also. Lastly, let's add a way of closing the modal. So on click of the cancel button, we are going to close the modal. @click opened equals false. So that is pretty much it. Now let's make use of the component. We'll do that inside the welcome view. There are two ways we can make use of components. The first one is using the component tag. So @component. The component tag accepts two arguments. The first one is the path of the component relative to the views directory. So component/modal without the extension. The second argument is probs we want to pass to the component, which we'll look at later in the course. But for now, we will only focus on the first argument, which is the path of the component. Then we can close the tag either using end component or just end. Also, components can be self-closed. So in this case, since we don't have anything inside the block, we can simply just self-close the component. Let's check it out in the browser. So we have the button, and clicking on the button should open the modal, and it sure does, and clicking on cancel should close it. So everything is working as expected. Let's open the modal again. You notice if I click outside the modal, nothing happens. There are times we might want to have the modal closed when we click outside. We can easily do that with Alpine. So let's locate the modal panel, which is this. So we're going to add a click event to the div at click. Then we'll add a modifier to the click event, that is dot away. Then we'll set the action to opened to false. What the away modifier does is, if outside of this div is clicked, then we'll perform this action, which is set opened to false. Let's check it out in the browser once more. So we have the modal opened. This whitish background is the modal panel, the div which we added the click event to. So if I click inside here, nothing happens. But once I click outside this div, the modal closes. So now we can close the modal with cancel, or we can close it by clicking outside of the modal. I'm going to refresh this a couple of times. You'll notice the initial flicking of the modal, which looks kind of awkward. That is happening because if we head back to the welcome view, we have the reference to the entry points in the head session, and inside app.ts, we have the configuration for encore to set a defer attribute on the script. If we head back to the browser and open the source code for this, so we have the script with the defer attribute, which will simply defer loading this script, which means this script will be executed after the page is loaded. That is why we are getting that flick, because the HTML is being displayed before Alpine kicks in to hide or show the modal. A quick workaround this is to set the display of the container to none by default. Style display none, which is basically what xshow will do if opened is false, and if opened is true, display will be set to block. Let's check this out once again. Refresh. You notice we no longer get the flicking. Our modal is fully functional. Now let's make it reusable. Just like front-end frameworks like Vue, Edge component has the concept of props and slots, which are ways to pass data and other configurations to components. In this lesson, we will look at slots, then in the next lesson, we will cover props. Slots are outlets that a component's parent can define markup for, and they can be named. In the absence of named slots, everything within a component will be regarded as the main slot. So in our modal, we are going to have two slots, a trigger slot and the main slot. The trigger slot will contain the markup for opening the modal, while the main slot will simply be the content of the modal. So this will be the content of the trigger. For now, let's comment it out and define the trigger slot. Because slot can accept markup, so we are making use of the triple curly braces. We'll define the slot using await $slot dot, then the name of the slot, which in this case will be trigger. Also, let's define the main slot, which will be inside here. Again, I'm going to comment this out and define the main slot underneath. Await $slots dot main. Next, we need to update the usage of the component. Now, instead of making use of a self-closed component, we are going to make use of an explicit end tag. Then inside the component is where we'll pass the content for each of the slots we have defined. To do that, we make use of the slot tag at slot. This will accept the name of the slot. The first one is trigger. Then we can close the tag, and inside it is where we will add the markup for the trigger. So I'm simply going to copy the button we commented out earlier. Then we can have the main slot. Again, I'm going to copy the content. Let's check this out in the browser. I'm going to refresh. As you can see, the component is working as before. But now we've made it reusable and dynamic. Everything outside a named slot is regarded as the main slot. So since this is outside a named slot, then it will be regarded as the main slot. So we can get rid of this. And everything should still work as before. Next, let's extract the Alpine functionality into a dedicated component. So inside the JS directory, I'm going to create a new components directory. Then inside of it, I'll create a Modal.js file, which will be the dedicated Alpine component. So export default. We're going to have the same data from before. So opened will be set to false by default. Now we are going to create dedicated methods for opening and closing the modal. So open, which will simply set this dot opened to true. Then close will do the opposite. Next, let's import it inside app.js. Import modal from component/modal. Next, we need to make Alpine aware of the component. So Alpine.data. The first argument to the data function is the name of the component, which we will call modal. Then the second argument will be the implementation for the component, which is modal. Now we can make use of it in the markup. I'm going to get rid of this. Then simply call modal. Since the component doesn't accept any arguments, we can get rid of the brackets. And let's also update this to make use of the close method. Again, since this doesn't accept any arguments, I'm going to get rid of the brackets. Let's also update it inside welcome.edge. So this should be open and this should be close. If we head back to the browser, everything should still work as before. I'm sure it does. Now our component is fully reusable. Now let's imagine we want to create a modal for a sign-up form. We can easily do that with the modal component. I'm going to start by duplicating this. Then the button will say sign up. Let's give this a background of indigo. Then for the main content, I'm going to get rid of all this and paste in the content, which is a basic form with a couple of fields, a name field, an email field, a password field, and a password confirmation field. Then lastly, we have the register button. Let's check this out in the browser. Now we have a sign up modal and an alert modal. So that is how to create a reusable modal edge component with Alpine.js. In the next lesson, we will look at another example.